Greetings gamers, Tim Kirk here, and I'm a little bit disheveled from the weather, the variance between raining and somewhat comfortable and boiling hot. It got up to 112 last week in my vicinity of Texas. Today was a lot more comfortable, but it was a little gray and it rained the night before last. Now, that's great. I'm glad for good weather, which is what I consider gray and rainy weather in this part of Texas, as opposed to the boiling hot. Now, I was going to talk about Hearts and Souls, but something happened that changed my direction for this video. Primarily, I received this game book in the mail, Fate Core System. Now, I'm a fan of Fate, and I was not a fan of Fudge, because there's just something about Fate that grabs me in the way the original Fudge system didn't. And I like the way Fate has been driven and inspired creative types to create their own version of Fate that powers a variety of different games. Spirit of the Century, Bulldog's Fate Edition, Star Blazers Adventures, Legends of Anglier, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and a variety of other games and game systems that have been published. Now, the thing with Fate is that it is not entirely bland, but it is still a generic game system, and a lot of generic game systems have a certain level of blandness to them. Simply the nature they don't have any genre helping mechanics, that is, designed to create the genre for the setting, or help the setting create the genre, however you foresee them working together. And the nice thing about it is that Fate manages to do this in quite a few ways and tinker with its own internal mechanics well enough to create somewhat more focused versions of a semi-generic system and be entirely enjoyable in the process. It aims to be a little like reading a book in some ways, as the way scenes are set up and the way momentum from stress and fate dice and fate points flow, is that it does create the desire for trouble and conflict inherent in most settings to help power a game session with the rules. And that may sound really babbly, so forgive me. But the interesting thing about it is this is a new version of Fate, a cleaned up, simplified version that's fairly crisp. There's even more simplified version called Fate Accelerated Edition that is out, and I did not get a print copy of that, unfortunately. A friend actually kickstarted me a copy of the book in this case, because I am unfortunately a poor game designer and don't have a lot of money to kickstart things I would otherwise love to have. And I feel Fate is one of those things that I am very happy friends said, hey, Tim would like this and he'll write something for it. And they're right, I will write something for it. In fact, I have been struggling with finding a proper set of rules for a game setting that I have in my head called Smite. It's set in a city called Nomura. It's a fantasy setting, but it is a gigantic city, and the players play, get this, D&D style characters as police procedural SWAT members. So while they're not exactly what we would consider SWAT, they're multidisciplinary. They are basically there to perform police procedural in a world that is otherwise like D&D dialed up a few notches. Meaning, it's a fantasy city with elves, dwarves, goblins, trolls, halflings, whatever other crazy race you might want to foresee. Magic is legal and licensed, and there's an asylum for the insane. There's a place to keep magical criminals and normal criminals, because magical criminals require special circumstances in order to imprison them. And the general idea is that the players take part of these people who solve crimes and deal with things like hostage situations, terrorist threats, a lot of modern issues that the rest of us deal with, not necessarily person to person, but we see happening both in our fiction and occasionally in our real media like the news. And the thing with it is I want this to be played up a little bit for humor. Most of the books that I have read that inspired this setting are very much similar to it in that they have a tiny touch of humor along with the seriousness. The Hawk and Fisher Guard books by Simon Green, the Thraxis series, and I don't remember who the author is offhand, and the, oh, what other one was I thinking of? I've drawn a blank. Anyway, so those two at least. Oh, the Garrett Files by Glenn Cook. That was the other one. That just goes to show you, write down this stuff. Don't try and do it extemporaneously like I do. But the day in, the day out, whatever you do, whatever game you choose to play, the engine for it, in my opinion, should be optimized to power the game setting. And that's what Fate allows me to do without creating a completely new system. Now, don't mind me, I will do that quite a bit. Just because I've decided to write a Fate-powered game does not mean I've given up on running my own game mechanics, because I generally am proud of what I do with game mechanics, keeping them simple, keeping them fluid, and keeping them flowing, as well as keeping them very, very concise in many ways, and letting there be a lot of open ability to influence play that isn't necessarily in how well you swing your sword. Example, in Hearts and Souls, you can monologue and banter and get re-rolls so that your superhero character succeeds when he really wants to succeed, when the player wants them to succeed. So there's no little girls being run over by trains. And yes, that is something that has occurred to me in a superhero game, and which pretty much put me off of that kind of superhero games, because it shouldn't happen just because you didn't build enough points or dice or whatever into your superpower. It should be dramatic. It should be tense. It may look like you should fail, but at the end of the day, that failure should cost you something, and yet be, the potential failure should cost something, but the end should be a success, because that creates the tension and drama we want. And that's one of the things that I like about Fate, is it allows us to get some of that tension itself without being a system I wholly created entirely on my own, which means I have a little less work to do. Not a lot, just a little. So basically, this is me encouraging you to look at the Fate system, try it out, try both the Fate core system or the Fate Accelerated Edition. Prior to those coming out, my favorite version of Fate, and I still haven't read it yet, so I don't know if it will actually become my new favorite or not, but prior to those, my favorite was Bulldogs Fate Edition, because it's a fairly simple version. It allows you to build aliens of all kinds, it allows you to build starships, and it's got a very simple set of explanations that cover playing with the Fate system and doing it well. And that's an impressive fact, because there are some versions of Fate I couldn't get my head around at all. Diaspora, which I have friends who love Diaspora and love the things it did, but just something about that rulebook did not work for me. And I had it, I thought it was a nice idea, it had some great stuff in it, but my head just didn't wrap around the way it was using mechanics and the ideas they were implementing. It may have been the layout, it may have been the text density, there's no telling. I cannot actually explain why Diaspora did not work for me and Bulldogs Fate Edition did. Now, I enjoyed Star Blazer's Adventures as well for sci-fi, but it was a little bit of a hefty tome to show my players, so Bulldogs was sort of a compromise to, hey look, here's a thin rule book, it's not complicated, you'll understand it. Fate Core is a little thicker, but it is something that allows me to inspire them a little bit, because it gives a lot of tools and ways of tweaking the Fate system from what I understand. This is going to be a short video. I'm not going to try and stick to my normal 15 minutes, so have a nice day. Hope the weather where you're at is cooler than where I'm at, and enjoy your gaming. Goodbye.